This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, sports fans and weightlifting fans. My name is Mark Mortier, and welcome to another edition of no-nonsense, old-school weightlifting history. You can also find my articles and podcasts on Yesterday Sports on the Sports History Network. Today we have a special guest. His name is Dr. Conor Heffernan. Conor is a lecturer in the sociology of sport at Ulster University. And where's that again?
Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland. Conor has written numerous articles on weightlifting, bodybuilding, powerlifting, and strongman competitions. He writes for barbend.com and has a website titled physicalculturestudy.com. Okay, welcome to the show, Conor.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Mark, especially, as I said, off air. It's a little bit of plate spinning had to go on, so I'm excited to finally be here.
All right. So I was reading some of your articles, and you mentioned four guys that resonated with me. We have, I never know exactly how to say his name. We have Naim Süleymanoğlu, considered by most as the best pound-for-pound weightlifter ever. We have Tommy Conor, considered by many as the best pound-for-pound weightlifter of his era. We have Ken Patera, the first American weightlifter to clean and jerk 500 pounds. After retiring from lifting, Patera had a very successful pro wrestling career. And we have Paul Anderson, who competed in weightlifting and powerlifting, performed various feats of strength, and even did a little pro wrestling, which I didn't know about until reading Conor's article. So, who would you like to talk about first, Conor?
I think maybe, being the historian in me, maybe we'll do it chronologically. So maybe we'll start with Anderson, move on to Conor, Patera, and then finish with the Pocket Hercules. What do you think?
Sounds good. So we have Paul Anderson, who won a gold medal at the 1955 World Championships. Then he won a gold medal at the 1956 Olympics. And you could talk more about his career, being that you... as I said, I was not aware of his brief wrestling career. Did some pro wrestling, and that was mainly to raise money for his for the youth home that he had. Correct?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So, at the beginning, maybe you want to talk a little bit about some of Anderson's accomplishments, and then about his how he got into pro wrestling.
Yeah, so and I think the first thing to say is, Paul Anderson is very much the Superman from the South, which is what Jim Murray, obviously another weightlifting aficionado, referred to him as. This is someone who predominantly competed in the 1950s, early 1960s. In a modern age, Paul Anderson would be someone akin to maybe a Mark Henry type figure. Mark Henry, obviously better known for wrestling, but
Right.
An incredibly proficient weightlifter, incredibly proficient natural strongman, winner of the first Arnold Strength Classic. Paul Anderson is very much in that mold. He was an incredibly accomplished Olympic weightlifter. He would have been an incredibly accomplished powerlifter, but powerlifting didn't exist as a sport in the 1950s, truly. And he would have been a very accomplished strongman, but obviously strongman doesn't really come around until the 1970s, if we discount the early, music hall and vaudeville days. So, we have in Paul Anderson the complete heavyweight athlete. And there's a really funny inroad into talking about Paul Anderson. And the way to do that is to talk about who discovered Paul Anderson. The man who discovered Paul Anderson and really encouraged him on his weightlifting journey was Bob Peoples. Now, Bob Peoples is someone people probably are familiar with. They at least have probably seen the image of Bob Peoples if they're listening to this podcast, he was the man who deadlifted 725 pounds in the 1940s. And Bob wrote to Strength and Health magazine, Bob Hoffman's great weightlifting and physical culture magazine, in 1952 to report that he'd discovered this supernatural 19-year-old who was 275 pounds, could squat 550 pounds with ease, could do a single rep at 635 at 19. And then people went on to, continually praise and suggest that this is going to be the next great American athlete. And you can trace Anderson's incredible journey from 1952 to, say, 1956, when he wins a gold medal for the United States in the Melbourne Olympics. And he is someone who continually improves as a lifter. In terms of his best lifts, which is probably something people, care about the most, clean and press. Obviously, the press is something we no longer do in a competitive setting, although I think it would be an amazing thing. It's really a lot of strength for us to bring back. Clean and press, 185 kg, so 408 pounds at the 55 World Championships. Snatch of 150 kilos at the 56 Senior Nationals. Clean and jerk of 199 kg, so 440 pounds at the 56 Nationals. A total of 532 kilos, at the 56 Senior Nationals. A total back then being clean and press, snatch, clean and jerk. We also have unofficial lifts, and I am saying these somewhat tongue-in-cheek, because Anderson did a little bit of showmanship as well. So he is credited with a 540 kilo squat, a 285 kilo bench, give or take, and a 370 kilo deadlift. We take those with an asterisk because, things done in training or exhibition are obviously different to a standardized competition. According to Anderson, he could clean and press 219 kilos, snatch 170, and clean and jerk 219. Like, an incredibly strong man. And there's some wonderful quotes that I dug up, when trying to prepare for this episode. So, Chuck Ahern, a Muscle Beach strongman from the 1950s. People may have seen an image of Chuck Ahern's on Muscle Beach. He's holding someone in the palm of his hand and lifting them up. And he said, I could do 310 in a standing one-arm side press with a dumbbell. Paul could do it with reps with ease. You have Bill Kazmaier, 3-time world's strongest man, calling him the king of strength. Doug Reinhold, one of the strongest powerlifters of all time, saying that was his inspiration. So Anderson was really, I think, one of the first modern strength legends in American history. And when I say modern, I mean 1950s, 1960s onwards. He's not one of the late 1800s, early 1900s strongman. And I think the thing that was one of my favorite stories about Paul Anderson and shows how impressive he is. John Fair and Sam. Oh, I'm friends with him. I can't remember his surname. That's going to haunt me. John Fair co-authored an article on the US weightlifting team's tour of the Soviet Union in the mid-1950s. And the United States were adamant, and Bob Hoffman, who's the US coach, was adamant that Paul Anderson had to be there. Because if you're showing America as a nation, you need to show Paul Anderson. And there's stories of, Paul Anderson gripping a bar with about 402 pounds on it. And the Russians sort of laughing at this, thinking like, what's going on? And then just going completely silent as he hoists it up and presses it overhead. And the Russian announcer saying, rarely have we seen such weights ever lifted. And it's this sort of, ineffable strength that Paul Anderson seemed to embody. And, the great shame for a strength historian, such as myself, is that Anderson retires so quickly. Like, he has one gold medal to his name from an Olympic standpoint. He has 2 US national weightlifting championships, 1 world championship. But all of that comes from 55 to 56. He's quickly ousted sort of, from Olympic sports because he has accepted money to do weightlifting and strength exhibitions and has done professional wrestling. So he's no longer an amateur athlete. He's a professional athlete. So rather than continuing into the 1960s, he sort of stops his competitive career in the mid-1950s. And just to circle back, this is someone who was discovered in 1952.
Right.
By 1956, he's the king of the world of heavyweight lifting at an Olympic level, and is an accomplished, we would say, proto powerlifter, proto strongman. whose career is really 7 years long, give or take. So one of the world's strongest men took weightlifting by storm, and I think was an inspiration to the first generation of powerlifters and also the first generation of world's strongest men competitors.
Well, he absolutely inspired a lot of people to go on with their careers in weightlifting and powerlifting, and I guess after Anderson was no longer competing in weightlifting, he was doing a lot of strongman like feats of strength. He won.
Mm-hmm.
I know he was on the Ed Sullivan show a few times doing various feats of strength, and then he started the. I don't know exactly what year he started his youth home, but that is what got him into pro wrestling. So I don't really know exactly how long did he do the pro wrestling.
Yeah, and you're right to link the Paul Anderson Youth Home, which was started in 1961, if memory serves, with the pro wrestling, and the important part of his life, which I didn't mention, was his devout Catholic faith, and this is something which encouraged Paul Anderson to create a sort of a home for children who are at risk, and to fund that home, he engaged in feats of strength. He's credited in the Guinness Book of World Records with a backlift totaling into thousands and thousands of pounds. And strength historian Joe Rourke has sort of put a little asterisk of sorts on the official weight that's listed. But he does do these feats of strength, to try and raise money for his home and raise awareness of his home. He does go into professional wrestling briefly, to again try and raise awareness and raise money for his home. His wrestling career begins in 1958 and ends in the early 1960s. And, in total, he wrestles about 57 matches with a number of different territories. There's some smaller territories, but there are ones that if you're a fan of professional wrestling in the mid-century, you'd be aware of. He wrestles in Jim Crockett Promotions, for example. He wrestles, in the NWA Mid-America territory. The people he's fighting against aren't necessarily renowned, wrestlers. I suppose the biggest fight he has, he tagged with Haystacks Calhoun against the Fabulous Fargo, so Don Fargo and Jackie Fargo. Jackie Fargo obviously being an inspiration to Jerry the King Lawler in the Memphis territory, but he is the sort of quintessential strongman wrestler, and you'll see one of the bouts that he has for Jim Crockett Promotions in North Carolina. He faces Attilo Tondo, who's a boxer. So they're using him as an exhibition wrestler. There's a fight again that he has in Louisiana for NWA Mid-America where it's a 2-on-1 handicap match. It's him against the Jimenez brothers. So they're using him as that like center, this is a showpiece marquee curio event. And it's interesting because you'll actually see parallels with what Paul Anderson is doing with what Bill Kazmaier does in the late 1980s when he'll show up in WCW, actually wrestled Mick Foley, who's then Cactus Jack, later Mankind, for more modern wrestling fans, several points. And it is that, the strong man, can anyone stop him? Can anyone beat him? Etc. He doesn't stick with professional wrestling for a particularly long time. When you look into why that was, it was a combination of not enjoying it, certainly not enjoying the lifestyle attached to it,
Right.
and then just the travel involved as well, because professional wrestling in the 1950s and early 1960s was a slog, and you're constantly traveling, not treated well. The payouts actually weren't particularly good unless you're the marquee individual, whereas he had that out where he could do feats of strength. And something that he was very famous for, during the same period, was he had a nightclub act in Reno where he would supposedly do a silver dollar squat, there's a safe on each side of the barbell, and he's squatting rumored to be, 1,100 pounds or 900 pounds. And after each performance, if anyone could duplicate the feat of strength, they could collect all of these silver dollars. So he did have an out, on professional wrestling, but it was something that he tried. And I think the reason he tried it was because he was trying to raise funds for the Paul Anderson Youth Home. He was trying to raise awareness, and also part of it does seem to have been connected to his Christian faith. So he was a member of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, who were very big in the 20th century, where they'd travel around the country giving, inspirational talks, linking their faith to their physical strength and their mental and moral courage. So, like, he has that incredible versatility, and that's why I say he is sort of the first prototype, multi-strength athlete that is so rare even in the modern age. Obviously, Bill Kazmaier did powerlifting and then strongman, and so did some of the early world's strongest men. But, Mark Henry would be maybe the closest parallel that we'd have for elite level, competing at the highest level, weightlifters.
Well, that's great information you gave us, and I think maybe you spoke about the Soviet team. I think maybe they summed it up best. They called Paul Anderson a wonder of nature. They were so like you mentioned, they were so spellbound about how strong he was. They had never seen anything like it, and the Soviets called him a wonder of nature. So,
and it's hard to disagree.
Yeah, great lifter, great strong man, and a great man. Did a lot to help the youth of the. Okay, so who did you want to do next?
Well, I think it'd be good to do a contemporary of Paul Anderson, that being Tommy Kono, because obviously Kono competes before and after Anderson's tenure at the 56 Melbourne Games. So for anyone, and I have it actually beside me here, for anyone who wants to know more about Tommy Kono, I'd just say John Fair's released a new book, and it's a new biography of Tommy Kono, which is really rather wonderful, with McFarlane. It details Kono's early childhood. It covers, his internment during the Second World War, his deep faith with the Buddhist religion, his moves in between bodybuilding and weightlifting, and then also I think something that's oftentimes underlooked, which is his impact in weightlifting after his competitive days as an athlete, where he's a coach in West Germany, where he helps to lead to the development of the low-cut weightlifting shoes that Adidas became famous for. He's also sort of the first significant coach of the US women's weightlifting team in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So an incredibly important figure in weightlifting writ large. Now, obviously, we're here to look at him more as an athlete rather than a representative or a coach. And I think the first thing to say is, when you look at sort of IPF honors, Tommy Kono is oftentimes depicted as the complete athlete. Like, this is someone who broke 26 world records, set 7 Olympic records, is still the most accomplished US male weightlifter to date. He won 2 Olympic gold medals, one in the 52 Helsinki Games in the sort of 67 kilo weight class, and then again in the Melbourne Olympics, where he's in the 82.5 kilo weight class. Won, I think, 6 gold medals at World Weightlifting Championships, won 3 Pan American Games, was named the lifter of the century by the IWF in 2005, and he was an incredibly proficient athlete. And what I mean by that is, it was a very rare thing to see Kono miss a lift. And as anyone who's followed weightlifting will know, it's like that's not an easy thing to achieve in one's career, to be known for that level of consistency. And I think what's so interesting about Kono, and why he's maybe seen as the lifter of the century, is that he is breaking records. He is doing it in different weight classes, and he's doing it in a slightly different era. And what I mean by that is, when you come out of the 1940s and into the 1950s, this is the time of American exceptionalism within Olympic weightlifting. And this is the golden age of American weightlifting. Obviously, by the end of the 1950s, Soviet Union is becoming more proficient and more powerful within the sport. But Kono is part of that great wave of American weightlifters who are sweeping gold medals at Olympic Games and World Championships. And they all talk about Kono as the freak. They all talk about Kono as the best athlete. And it's one thing to be the best in a bad bunch, to be the best in the greatest generation, to use a different type of metaphor, in American weightlifting says a huge amount. And, if you think about like the 1956, Olympics, he's in the light heavyweight division, sets a world record of a 986 total. he is consistently capturing first places in a range of different competitions. And the thing that really, kills him at the end, so to speak, is injuries rather than, his strength decreasing or his strength going down. And I think Kono, there's such an interesting parallel between Kono and Anderson, because Anderson has that strong Christian faith. Kono, as John Farr's book shows, really uses Buddhism within his sort of weightlifting practice. And before we have sports psychology and any of these things, Kono was writing about successful weightlifting isn't the body, it's in the mind.
Right.
And saying you have to strengthen your intellect to shut out everything, and you can't have a negative attitude, and you have to be able to just focus on the present and focus on the next thing. So Kono is almost this robotic, incredible weightlifter who's breaking records left, right, and center. He's one of the inspirations for Arnold Schwarzenegger, and there's a great documentary available on YouTube called Arnold Knows Me, the Tommy Kono story. He is, and I'll stop talking in a second, but the only thing to mention as well about Kono, he's also known, for successfully winning a bodybuilding championship as well. As he won IWF Mr. Universe titles in the 1950s, 54, 55, 57, and 61. So like this incredibly proficient, successful, multi-sport athlete, still, I think, for many people, the greatest ever male weightlifter from the United States. Some would say the greatest ever lifter, point blank, period. And I think there is a very strong argument to be made for that. And in his generation, he was seen as completely untouchable. So again, this great feat of American strength at a time when America is at its strongest. And I think that is the encapsulation of how important he was.
No, well, his list of accomplishments is just mind-boggling. I think you mentioned that he won 6 world championships. He actually won seven in a row world championship gold medals from 1953 to 1959 to 1959. 7 in a row. And then also won, competed in the 1960 Olympics. Mm-hmm. I believe that was in Rome, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and he won a silver medal at that Olympics. So 2 gold medals in the Olympics, and then a silver medal. And maybe you could touch on a little bit. Here's something interesting I read too. He actually, in the 1952 Olympics in Helsinki, he got food poisoning, a bad case of food poisoning, and still won the gold medal. And then maybe you could touch a little on the, how the internment camp during the war. I think that's where he actually started, where he got his first interest in lifting, because, obviously there isn't much to do in an internment camp, and he started lifting weights in that camp.
Yeah, and I think it's probably good to start with the internment camp, because everything sort of flows, from there. So Kono is born in Sacramento, California in 1930. He's an incredibly sickly child. He has asthma, during his early years, and it was said, and John Farr's wonderful biography, again, is a good resource on this, that he missed about a third of his elementary school experience because he was so unwell and so sick.
Wow.
When Japan attacks the United States with Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans are forced to live in internment camps, in the United States. Kono and his family are moved to an internment camp at Newell in California, and it's there that his health improves, which he credits to the dry desert air. But it's also there that he meets a fellow internee, Emmerich Ishikawa, if I remember correctly, who was the first Japanese American to capture a senior nationals weightlifting title, and actually was on the 48 Olympic team for the US in weightlifting. And it's under Ishikawa that Tommy Kono was introduced to weightlifting. So in the internment camp, the Japanese Americans begin to form weightlifting associations, because, as I say, Mark, Like, there's not really a lot to do in these internment camps, and it's actually rather incredible that they have access to, you know, these barbells, and have access to sport. And there is a realization that people need things to be, diverted from the realities of being in an internment camp at this time. So Kono is introduced to weightlifting there. He begins to build his physique. He begins to, improve his health. When he gets out of the internment camp, he returns to Sacramento in 45 and begins lifting at the local YMCA. And obviously the YMCAs and the YMCA gyms were so important in the diffusion of weightlifting in the US and just strength training more generally. In 48, Kono competes in his first weightlifting championships, the AAU North California Games. Now, to just pause and sort of put a full stop on the internment experience, again, John Fair's book has done a really excellent job of showing how Kono was relatively unaffected by his internment camp. And what I mean by that is Kono did not come out of the internment camp experience resentful towards the United States. And indeed, he enrolls in the US Army in 51 and he was originally stationed in Korea, or he was meant to be stationed in Korea, pardon me.
Yeah.
And, so he serves his country. He is able, and I mentioned this idea of, weightlifting being in the mind as opposed to in the body. He's able to just sort of put a full stop on things, which John Fair credits with that sort of Buddhist upbringing that he would have had, and that ability to stay present and shut out negative thoughts. So when we go back to 52 and he has food poisoning the night before, he's very able to section, what's happening and the narrative from competing, and it is something that I think differentiates the truly excellent from the good. And this is something that Kono is able to do. There's even the story that, I mentioned the 1955 US tour of the Soviet Union, where Paul Anderson impresses everyone with his feats of strength. There are stories that the Soviets were trying to film Kono in training to figure out his secret during this tour. They deliberately put him in like terrible accommodation to try and put him off his game for the weightlifting feats. And he goes out and he defeats, all the Soviet lifters many times over in that tour. So he's someone who it's very difficult to stop him competing. He's very good at shutting off the noise, potential excuses from what's going on in his head. And it's funny, you mentioned the weightlifting. I was at the Sheffield powerlifting competition last year, and Taylor Atwood, probably one of the best natural powerlifters in the world, certainly in the last decade, had terrible food poisoning leading up to it. He had a knee injury, he had all these things. I remember chatting to him about it, and he just said, I'm here to compete. And he's on stage and he's not at his best, and he hits, it must have been a heavy squat, and shouts, I'm here to win it. Now, he didn't in it, but just that mindset of, it doesn't matter, I'm here, to hell with what's come before this, was very Kono-esque, and it's something that stuck with me then after that.
Amazing. And then, as you mentioned, also competed in bodybuilding, winning the Mr. Universe 4 times. So just an incredible career. List of accomplishments is just mind-boggling. And like you said, most of it he did through his mental. He was just so mentally strong that nothing seemed to affect him. He just kept going. Yeah.
And I think, as a way to sum up his greatness, he's the only weightlifter to set world records in 4 classes: lightweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and middle heavyweight. Now, obviously, the divisions are completely different nowadays, so it's tough to do a like for like. But just for someone to jump from lightweight, which would have been 148 pounds, to middle heavyweight, which would have been under 198 pounds.
Yeah.
Like, what athlete is going to risk, jumping up weight classes to that extent? Like, oftentimes someone will drop down or go up.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to maintain excellence across that biggest strand of strength and weight.
4 different weight classes. That's just incredible. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to Ken Patera.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.